Do you often feel like someone is behind you when you're walking home alone, only to turn around and see nothing there?
Li Zhongping was an office worker, nearly 40 and unmarried. He lived alone in an old apartment in a quiet part of Chongqing. The building was worn, cracked walls, water stains, and a lingering damp smell in the stairwell.
Though few people lived upstairs, he always felt the place was oddly quiet, almost suffocatingly so.
However, because the rent was cheap and the location was close to his company, Zhang Peng didn't choose to move.
One day after work, he ran into a delivery guy at the entrance of the complex. The young man looked shocked, even a bit panicked, and asked, "Bro, someone actually lives in this building?"
Zhang Peng was taken aback and chuckled, "Of course people live here. I live on the 5th floor, and there are a few families upstairs."
The young man swallowed nervously and said in a low voice, "Bro, I've heard people say, this building isn't very clean. You better be careful."
The delivery guy hurried off, as if afraid that saying one more word would bring misfortune upon himself. Zhang Ping laughed and even felt a little contempt for the guy's cowardice.
But as he stepped into the stairwell, that same inexplicable chill returned. He suddenly considered moving, but then dismissed the thought. In this world, he reasoned, one can't be too superstitious. The clock struck midnight. The entire building was eerily.
Suddenly, faint footsteps came from downstairs. Zhang Peng frowned.
There were few residents in the building, and it was rare for anyone to be moving around this late.
He stood up and looked out the window toward the stairwell, but saw nothing. It was completely empty. Just as he was about to close the window, the footsteps suddenly quickened, becoming rapid pattering sounds, as if someone were dashing up the stairs.
The sound grew louder and clearer, heading straight toward his 5th floor apartment.
Zhang Peng held his breath and peeked carefully through the crack in the door, but saw no one in the stairwell. Only the strange footsteps stopped right outside his door.
Suddenly, there were 3 soft knocks on the door. Do-do-do. Zhang Peng froze, his heart clenching tight. Who would be knocking at this hour, and why so quietly?
Trembling, he looked through the peephole. Outside was dimly lit, but vaguely he could make out a shadow standing at the door.
The shadow stood oddly still, arms limp at its sides, head slightly tilted, staring straight into the peephole, as if watching him.
Li Zhongping broke into a cold sweat, not daring to make a sound, even suppressing his own breath. After a few minutes, the knocking suddenly stopped, and the stairwell fell silent again. He let out a sigh of relief, thinking he had overreacted.
However, when he looked through the peephole again,
the shadow was still there, standing at his door. Only this time, the shadow slowly lifted its head, revealing a twisted face that smiled directly at the peephole.
Li Zhongping stumbled backward in terror. The face was pale as paper, grotesquely distorted with a horribly unnatural grin that revealed sharp teeth. Then the shadow spoke softly. "Li Zhongping, do you remember me?" His body froze, unable to comprehend what was happening.
At that moment, the shadow outside suddenly let out a sharp, piercing laugh, a laugh so eerie it made his bones ache.
Zhang Ping looked up. The hallway was silent again. After making sure the shadow was gone, he returned to his bedroom, shaken, and didn't sleep all night. A few days later, Zhang Ping decided to ask a neighbor. An elderly woman in her 60s lived on the 2nd floor, one of the few remaining residents on the 4th floor.
her surname was Huang. She had lived there for over 20 years and knew everything about the place.
Auntie Huang, do you know if anything unusual ever happened in this building?
Li Zhongping asked cautiously.
Auntie Huang's face suddenly changed. She gave him a complicated look and asked, "Are you talking about that person?"
Li Zhongping was stunned. He quickly followed up, "Who do you mean?"
Auntie Huang sighed and lowered her voice.
More than 20 years ago, this building had just been built. A young woman lived on the 5th floor. She was very beautiful and had a good personality.
But unfortunately, she had a falling out with her husband. He left her and took all their belongings, leaving her alone.
After that, she changed. She often stood on the balcony, staring blankly into the distance.
And then? Li Zhongping asked, growing more uneasy.
Auntie Huang shook her head. One night, we all heard strange laughter from the 5th floor. It went on for a long time.
The next morning, she was found hanged in her home.
But the strangest thing was that not long after her death, people started claiming they saw her shadow wandering the hallways.
Li Zhongping broke into a cold sweat, a growing unease settling in his chest.
Auntie Huang continued, "Take my advice. If you can move out, do it as soon as possible. All the old neighbors have already left. The rest are leaving soon too."
Zhongping returned home, deeply disturbed. For the next few nights, as soon as night fell, he felt a cold presence in his apartment. That night, he heard the familiar footsteps again from downstairs. Summoning his courage, he left the door slightly ajar and watched as the steps grew louder, until they stopped at his door.
Moments later, a vague shadow appeared again. This time, the outline was clearer, appearing to be a woman in white, standing motionless at the door.
Li Zhongping, she softly called his name. Her voice was sharp and low, like a cold blade piercing his heart.
Do you still remember me? Suddenly, a pale, feline-like face flashed before his eyes. Yes, it was her. She was the woman Auntie Huang had mentioned. Her face from when she was alive slowly resurfaced in his memory.
I don't know you.
He screamed, clutching his ears, trying to shake off the shadow.
But the shadow suddenly reached out a pale hand, slipping through the slightly open door, and slowly grabbed his shoulder.
"You don't remember, but I do," the cold voice whispered in his ear. "You ruined me. You ruined me!"
He snapped his eyes open and found himself collapsed on the floor in the darkness. Looking up, he saw the door had been pushed open.
A vague shadow slowly approached until its face was inches from his.
The face remained twisted, still smiling as it whispered, "I've come for you."
Since that night, Li Zhongping never returned to work.
When the police found him, he was curled up on his bed, eyes blank, murmuring the same phrase over and over. "He came for me. She still remembers me."
The building was eventually demolished, but the workers who brought it down said that at the moment it collapsed,
They seemed to hear the low